Hello, viewers. My name is Dr. Dionisio Nyaga, and I'm an assistant professor at Algoma University School of Social Work. I've been here for the last 3, going to 4 years, and I teach social work practice, mostly focused on anti-oppression. But my focus entirely is on anti-Black, anti-African forms of racism. And I also focus on question of spirituality, question of psychic perspective in research, teaching, and practice, but entirely focusing on social work. And with me today is Dr. Paul Benahini Adjei, and I think I'll pass over the baton to my friend. Please introduce yourself to the viewers.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Paul Benahini Adjei. I am an associate professor at Memorial University. I'm also the interim associate vice president for Indigenous research. I am originally from Ghana, and I have lived in Canada for the last 21 years, 10 years in Toronto, and also the last 11 years in St. John's, Newfoundland. In terms of my scholarship, I focus mostly on anti-Black racism and African indigeneity. I also draw a lot on critical race theory and anti-colonial thought as a frameworks that really inform my writings and also my sense of activism.
Thank you, Paul. And I think without much ado, I think it will be good to dive into our today's discussion, which actually focuses on elders' knowledge and the third eye. And today with us is Paul Benahini, who is going to, guide us into imagining and understanding what elders' knowledge is. So, Paul, what is elders' knowledge?
Okay, thank you very much, my brother. Before maybe we talk about elders' knowledge, or what I choose to call, George Day and I choose to call elders' critical teachings, we need to first of all unpack who is an elder, or what is an elder. And as I mentioned, elder is a generative concept that is anchored in a cultural location. It is a status that is always assigned to people because of their contribution to communities. And it's not necessarily ascribed by age, but it is more informal and recognized the individual contribution to the community. And because they are the cultural custodians of indigenous communities' knowledge, they are seems to be a bit closer to their ancestors. And therefore, they are highly recognized and respected within indigenous communities. In fact, among the Asantes of Ghana, we have a saying that "Unipeni adue," simply means you are cursed, or you are doomed to fail if you don't have an elder. I think that is the right translation. You are doomed to fail if you don't have an elder. Part of it is because we have a saying that there is nothing new under this sun. Everything that is occurring in our present moment has happened before. And the uniqueness and the worth of elders is the experience that they carry with them. Having lived longer on the land, they have certain knowledge and wisdom that they have acquired as a result of a close relationship and attachment to the land, and therefore are always better situated to really offer knowledge and wisdom that can guide the present and the future generation. But also because the specific role of elders has always been the educators. They are parents. They offer wisdom. So I will, for instance, give you an example. Among an Asante culture, we have a concept called abrewetia. Abrewetia simply means an older lady. But again, I use the word older lady to mean somebody who is ascribed a feminine figure who is ascribed in the community as the embodiment of the cultural knowledge and wisdom, to the point that within the chief palace or even within traditional settings, whenever we are adjudicating any community issues or family issues or anything, and it reached a point of decision making, the elders who are part of the adjudication committee will always tell the person that, okay, we've heard all the versions of all the evidence that have been provided, or we've heard all sides of the story. Now it's time for us to consult the abrewetia or consult the proverbial old lady for guidelines and wisdom. And anytime, and so the adjudication committee will just get up and move somewhere to actually deliberate. Now they come back, whenever they return, they often say that, well, after consulting with the abrewetia, this is the final verdict. The implication is that the abrewetia is the embodiment of the cultural and the communal wisdom. She is known to be fair and also seeing everybody as part of her offspring, and therefore do not approach adjudication process with any biases. And because she is an embodiment of communal wisdom and cultural wisdom, anything emerging from abrewetia is the finality of thought, beyond which it cannot be critiqued or challenged. And so when they say this is what elders, what we gain out of consulting abrewetia, it implies that you wouldn't have had any fair and better judgment than the one coming from abrewetia, and therefore you are supposed to accept the outcome, even if you are not happy with that. Now, we use this as a metaphor to speak in a very broader sense the important role of elders. But there is a saying that when an elder dies in Africa, it's like a whole library has been burned down because they are the cultural custodians. Now, among the Yorubas, they have a saying that things that children will climb the okolo tree and will not see, an elder can sit down and still see it.
Oh my God. It reminds me, let me introduce myself from where I come from. I'm coming from Kenya, and we had this president. Most of you know him, President Moi. And most people used to say that whatever President Moi would see, right, sit down, these other young politicians can't even see, even if they climb the Mogumo tree, right? A
That's
tree,
right.
right?
That's right.
Now, and that actually is the central place where I want us to start, because when you talk about teaching, research, and practice in social work, majority of us, we hear about the role of culture in terms of, being competent in that, whatever. And I think a couple of people have written on that, and some of them, they've said it's an important aspect in social work practice and research and, teaching and learning. But there's also a conception that sometimes these terms, use of these terms could actually be manipulated or could be reduced by the very neoliberal system that actually operate within social work, and package that in a way to forget those histories that you're giving me about Abroatia as a woman who had the final say in terms of adjudication. Now, there's one point you talked about, that when an elder dies, it's a library that has, like we've lost a library. And it means a lot. It means that there's a lot of knowledge behind this person. And then now today we do understand what a library is. This is a place where we collect our books. This is a place where we do research, and it's added on more pile. It's about piling. This is where we also get to learn what we need to do. So the library is very important. Now, help me understand this library that is the elder and today's Western library in the perspective of how we conceptualize our understanding of social work, teaching, and learning.
Okay. I mean, you've raised a very good point about even the difference, and also the differences and the similarities between elders' knowledge and the knowledge also from Western library. One of the things that we should always remember that any knowledge, as soon as it is put in a test, we stop its ability to generate and reform into new ideas. Because written work always put a stop to an idea. It doesn't allow idea to grow. That is why whenever we do research in academy, we always ask the question, what has been done? And what is your work adding to that? Because we agree that anytime a work has been put in a test, it stops allowing room for knowledge to be reformed and to improve. Now, think about it this way. Elders as cultural custodians carry this knowledge, but this knowledge are not lodged in a sort of the fixed past, or in a sort of a prism that doesn't allow room for change and for improvement. In fact, elders as a librarian, and I use the word librarian as the custodians of knowledge. Remember, I have intentionally stayed away from the use of the word information, because elders' knowledge carry with them the lived experience, the tendency to revisit an existing knowledge and retune it to deal with contemporary issue. And so when elders, as the custodians of cultural knowledge, and also being part of the community, always stand the chance of applying the past knowledge to the present situation to offer a critique and suggestion that will be consistent with what will help the present and the future generation. So losing an elder is a huge loss, because yes, we could read the work. I mean, we all have gone back to some of our past articles and books that we've written and felt like these ideas don't represent me anymore. Or yes, 10 years ago, this is how I conceptualize social work. But today, my ideas have shifted. Well, because you put the idea back. And even an example is when our students submit papers, or when we are reviewing any article, and all the work the author has cited are 10-year-old literature. We say, what is this? I mean, we want more current ideas, because we recognize that once an idea is put in test, it stops growing, it stops developing. The difference is that elders have been living through life and experiencing every moment, historical moment, and therefore are able to share the knowledge of the past, the knowledge of the present, and also the knowledge to guide the future. But there is one thing that I have not added when we talk about eldership within the context of indigenous knowledge: their closeness to ancestors. And therefore, the knowledge they carry are not those that are only what they have inherited in the contemporary time, but also what they have learned from our ancestors. Because remember that they are the cultural custodians, And the way they access some of this knowledge are not only things that are physically accessible. Some are also spiritually.
Spot on. And it's, when you talk about whatever, on the question about spirituality, I think one of the things I've heard you say is that they are custodians.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy that you are able to extrapolate that and say it's not the Western custody, it's a different kind of custody that releases more, nuancing of what they hold. It shows a different kind of library that is vulnerable and ready for changes to come.
That's right.
Or yet to come. The changes yet
That's
to
right.
come.
That's right.
But there's also another part you talked about, and I'm happy you brought that it's because they understand the role of spirituality.
That's right.
That anything spiritual has no finality and cannot be tested.
That's
It
right.
keeps evolving over time. I
That's
think
right.
one thing I have heard is that, when you talk about, think about it, when you talk about elders teaching, it's spiritual.
That's right.
The problem we have with the current Western library is the elimination of the spirit so that we just have a book
Yeah.
that actually its purpose is to book you,
That's
right?
right.
To
Yeah.
take you away because it's a form of tested knowledge.
That's
Nothing wrong with testing, it's just the how of testing that we have a problem. And what that means is that book, the moment we add spirit into it, it becomes landed.
That's
So
right.
I heard you talk about landed aspect of it.
Yes, sir.
Now, when we talk about elders teaching, elders knowledge, and the question about the land, and the question about the spirit, I'm hearing reverberation about that eye.
That is exactly where I was going.
Let's go and let's tear about let's tear this about a bit more and
Yeah.
demonstrate that.
Remember, you also talk about the former president of Kenya.
Yeah.
And I also use the, Yoruba's proverb that what a child will climb okoro tree that will not see, elders will see when sitting down. Because of the tendency to have the third eye, to see the unseeable things, to sense things that have not yet happened. Now, to explain it in a language that will make people really understand in the layman's sense will be very difficult. But this is the point we talk about elders' connection with ancestors. The things that they are able to see, things that they are able to hear, the intuitiveness, the instinct to be able to sense something is about to happen before it can even become visible to ordinary person is what makes elders a rare gift to our humanity. Because they offer things that we can't find it in the textbook. Now, let's face it. I mean, what textbook does is to provide knowledge that have been archived, but do not help us to understand the livingness of the text. The instinctive aspect, the intuition, the ability to see the unknown and make sense of the things that ordinary minds are not able to explain. And that is what we talk about the elders having a third eye. That is why within indigenous cultures, we carry their words or we hold their words as having a high value. Because we believe that elders carry a special relationship with the land, with the universe around us, the cosmos world, because they understand their language. That what the younger generation may not be able to decipher, elders can easily help unpack it because of their unique relationship with the land, with the cosmos world, with the world of the dead, and even the world of the unborn. So the elders are seen as the link between what we call the trisphere. And the trisphere is about the world of the dead, the world of the living, and the world of the unborn. That is what makes them the cultural custodians of the cultural knowledge. Understanding that indigenous knowledge is also the physical and also the metaphysical, the spiritual, and the things that are science oriented. It is holistic and mixture of all. And therefore, the one who carry that knowledge have the gift of interpreting things that will be very difficult for the ordinary mind to be able to explain. And some of us believe that in terms of scholarship or in terms of academic environment where we value knowledge, the knowledge of elders far exceed any single textbook that we can talk about.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So the key thing I've heard from you is the fact that we have to break away from just the physical view, right? The view that we receive because of our two eyes, the view that is visible, right? We can
That's
see
right.
it because it's physical, it's tangible, it's something we can hold, and then we believe that as the only way of life. And therefore, and you see that tangibility in the production of books and citations are being put in a library. It's something we can touch. Like this is something that is knowledge made physical, right? But you also touched on the question of that with that physicality, something is being lost. We are not seeing far, right?
That's right.
We are our sight is short, shortened by the fact that there's no spirit giving us that resilience to look beyond what is presented to us in physical world. And you touch about the land and the question about why land is so important when it comes to what we think about knowledge production. And maybe the question I would ask next is, for you, what it is, because we could be talking about that eye here and no one really understand what it is. To you, what is that eye?
Because first of all, to talk about the third eye, we need to talk about the two eye.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah.
Ontologically speaking, when we look at the Western system, and I mean, it started with the Cartesian science, and the behavioral science, and their conception of about what knowledge is, and they help us to understand that knowledge is anything that our five senses tell us is there. So if our five senses cannot offer evidence that something is real, then it's not there. So when we say that, let us be real, I mean, how many times have you, when people say, let us be real, what they are basically saying that we need to talk about something that our five senses can't really confirm that is there. If my eyes can see it, if I can smell it, if my ears can hear, if it has the ability to utter words, if I can feel it, then it's there.
Mm.
That is how the Cartesian science has helped us to construct knowledge. And René Descartes, who is one of the, Western, positivist scholar or philosopher, really help us to construct knowledge in that particular way. Now, But we all know that there is more to knowledge than what our five senses teach us is there. And that is, knowledge can also be acquired through vision, through dreams, through intuition, and through trance. Because for indigenous community, the land itself is a teacher.
Mm, mm,
Animal
mm.
and all the resources, both animate and inanimate objects, are all teachers that teach us every day. They speak to us.
Oh.
Come to think of it,
Mm.
you remember some years ago, several years ago, the tsunami that really hit, was it the
Japan?
Yes, that hit Japan. Well, story is told that, was it Japan? Few hours before the tsunami hit the city, they saw birds and animals moving away.
Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
going to the mountains.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, indigenous communities that understand the language of the land and how it speaks to us will always say that the land is a teacher that is always teaching us. Now, it's one thing the land teaching us, and it's another thing us knowing what they are saying. And so for us, for indigenous communities, the other third eye, the third wave through which we interact with the unknowables are through the dreams, trance, visions. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. Remember that Cartesian science and positivist thinking have always engaged knowledge as an avenue of also securing power.
Yeah.
That the one who knows is the one who has power. So that's why we call the ego cognito. I think because I am.
Mm-mm.
I know because I am. And so there is always a sense of vulnerability when we are inviting academy into an arena where we have limited tools to really help. How do you analyze dreams? How do you unpack vision? How do you unpack intuition as ways of knowing? And so as a way of ensuring that knowledge is always controlled, we made those knowledge related to the third eye as we find a way of delegitimizing those knowledge or construct it as not real. But within eldership or within eldercrate, elders have the ability to combine what is visible and what is invisible, what is accessible through dreams and what is also accessible through what our five senses is telling us. They combine them to formulate ideas. And if you look at the history of indigenous communities, that has always how it be. Look, if you grew up in a village, you will remember many times where they can look at the sun and tell you the time.
Yeah. And even tell you when it's going to rain.
That's right. Or predict
about
what is going to happen. Because how do they know that? They also know it through careful observation of how nature communicates. And through that, those sorts of knowledge become a legitimate source of predicting the future. So I will give you an example. Let's say that right now, you had a dream. Let's say you went to bed and you had a dream. And in the dream, you saw Paul chasing you with a machete. And you were running around everywhere I was chasing you until you were cornered. And just when I raised the machete to cut you, in your attempt to scream and, your foot hit the bed and you woke up. You woke up sweating. It's like, what the heck is going on? What is the meaning of this nightmare? And then the next morning, you heard somebody knocking on your door. And you look in through your door, hole. And guess who is standing there?
Adjei.
Paul Adjei. The question is, would you open it to me or ask, Paul, what the heck are you doing here?
What's the plan here?
What is the plan here? Show
I
me
saw
your hands.
you.
That's right. For somebody who doesn't believe in the third eye will say, oh, come on, this is just a dream. Don't take it. But for indigenous people, for elders, they will tell you that dreams are legitimate means of knowing the reality. So don't dismiss that dream. Such was how powerful dream was in indigenous community that growing up as a child in my community, if you had a dream, sleeping with somebody's wife in a dream, when you wake up, you are supposed to go and perform a ritual. Because elders consider that as a taboo, even for that to happen in a dream. And in fact, if you tell that dream, it's interpreted as you have indeed have the intercourse with that person. Mm-hmm. Because elders have a way that the third eye simply means our ability to recognize that there is a world that is far exceed beyond us. And it's not everything that we can physically and intellectually and rationally grasp and interpret. So the third eyes allow room for the unknowable, the unseeable, to also be recognized as a legitimate ways of knowing. And that is what indigenous communities have always been talking about: holistic learning, holistic knowledge, holistic view of the world. Because we are just a single unit of a very complex universe. And sometimes the arrogance that we have to think that the whole world is for our control and domination, that ego cognito is so unbelievable, that to think that the universe was just created only for our purpose.
Wow. It's interesting that you brought that up, and I think we are coming to the tying up of our discussion in terms of elders' teachings, knowledge, and that eye, the pedagogy of that eye. Mm-hmm. And right now we are seated here. I believe you have a research you are doing. I'm also doing a research, but I'm also a professor. You are a professor. You're also a leader in your own way. I happen also to be a leader in my own way. So most of the time, I think, and especially in social work, when it comes to social work teaching, learning, leadership, practice, it is now becoming very clear that the world, the world we live in is not meant for everybody. If we think about the world as a socially constructed, phenomenon or a space, we know that there are particular bodies that don't exist, are not meant to exist in that world, because it's oriented to be white, it's oriented to embrace the white in it, or the whiteness in it. So it's a question about privilege, about knowledge. It's about who brought up that knowledge to create this world, and how wide the world is, to the extent where it expurges people who are racialized, or too LGBT, or those living with disability, or Africans, right? And part of that expulsion is the fact that these bodies are seen as bodies that don't fit within, the two-eyed Western phenomenon, right? That's phenomenon of teaching and learning and research. And so the only option we have is to expurge them. And that expulsion is not just easy, it's a violent expulsion. It's about denying their existence, right? And you talked about that, the fact that that I today, has been expurged from knowledge making because it's seen as untestable. It's not ready to be tested. But for us who are coming to the academy from a place of, of spirituality and being sensitive to spirituality when it comes to knowledge making, knowledge production, all these things, we recognize that there are things that you really can't, like you can't test them. They're there, and there's no metric of measure for those things. And from where I see it, I hear you talk about that. Let me ask you, now that we are coming to this point, how would you introduce the question about the dreams, for example, or intuition into your classroom, into your leadership, into research, into practice? How do you bring that, knowing very well that the space that is meant for knowledge making is super wide, believes in the five senses, doesn't believe about these senses don't stand alone. They are matched, they mash into each other in very complex way. How do you introduce that, that that aspect of the third eye, that aspect of the subjugated knowledge as part of the broader understanding of the two-eyed knowledge? How do you
Okay.
introduce that in a classroom
Uh,
or
I
your
think,
workplace?
yeah, I think the first aspect of it is that we are not introducing it. In fact, it's not ours. When I say we, I mean social work educators are not introducing the third eye because it's not ours to introduce. We are only recognizing it because whether we admit its existence or not, it really doesn't matter. The communities, the people have always recognized its existence, and it formed part of their lived reality. If we are being honest, it's one of the reasons why social work as a profession has not done really well with indigenous groups and racialized communities, because it is a profession that is really good at erasing bodies and erasing their experience, trying to recreate the new man. And I use the word man intentionally.
Yeah.
It's a profession that intended to always recreate the new man that suited the white norm and the white discourse. And in the process, we continue to leave a long list trail of bodies that this profession have contributed to their harming, despite the claim that this is a service profession that has always put human agency and human values ahead. I am talking about the manner in which whiteness have hijacked social work to the point that it has contributed in the profession losing its credibility among indigenous communities and racialized communities. These communities don't talk about social work with certain level of enthusiasm. You mention social work in indigenous communities, in racialized communities, and the first two things they may be thinking about is the harm that the communities are doing. Because, and I'm not saying this, let me maybe backtrack a little bit. I have always asked my students, if you are to go back to the period of residential school or the 60 schools or the millennial schools, do you think you will be doing harm. You will participate in harming indigenous people the way then social work did to indigenous people. And they have always given me the same response. There is no way we would do that. And yet this same student leave school, get into social work in the child welfare system, and contribute in removing indigenous children from their home, as if somehow this removal in the present generation is more with, realistic explanation, or there is an element of justification, and that those who participated in residential schooling and removing indigenous children from homes to residential school didn't have reasons for doing that. And I have always made the argument is that it's not because the social workers who participated in residential school or other harms that have been done to community, to racialized community, to indigenous communities were bad people, but they have been informed and conditioned to understand social work from a place that is highly violent. That even if people are engaging in this profession with openness of mind and genuineness of thought, they will still be doing harm. That's why I always say that I am always mindful when people say I am doing my job. Because how do you do your job when the job has been designed to cause harm?
I know.
Now, so back to the point about the importance of third eye. These communities have lived their life around third eyes. That is their epistemic and ontological reality. So when we are forcing them to abandon the third eye and embrace only the two eye, we are already doing harm, because we are inviting them to a world that does not exist in their world. And for me, that has always been the damage of social work. When we are forcing community to abandon their world into a world that doesn't exist for them. So yes, in some cases, communities try to assimilate. And in the process, what becomes successful for them is also what Fanon talked about, the amputation. They feel disconnected from their community. They feel disconnected from their land. What if, and this is where we are going with the direction of the third eye in social work, what if all this effort of social work in changing communities from their lived experience and lived reality of living in a third world, in the third eye world, and moving them into the two eye world that really don't exist for them, and they are not conditioned to live in this world? What
But
if we...
isn't that what we usually do in social work when we talk about, you know, and I'll speak about this because you're talking about the question of forgetting, right? The question of forgetting what? The values, the histories, the realities of indigenous communities, of Black communities, African communities, in the name of being culturally competent. I would assume right now we are talking about being spiritually sensitive, but we've commodified that process to the extent where we forget that, and then we say now we are good, we are pure. The social work is pure, is white, is clean, is good. There are no historical whatever on it. What's your thought about that?
I will not even talk. Yes, there are occasions where we talk about the harm that has been done in the past and our tendency to talk about we've changed a new leaf. Look, this is not the first time social work has apologized. We apologized for our role in residential school and still proceeded in doing the 60 scoops, the millennial scoops.
And the welfare.
We still apologize. And in recent times, we went ahead and took indigenous children from their homes and put them into foster care. When Truth and Reconciliation came out, we were first again to apologize, but still much have not changed. I always call it an apology that also, the language of the apology is always tailored in such a way that we avoid liability. There are certain words when you use in your apology, you make yourself open for legal suing or legal recourse. And social work has always been good in our selection of the words we use in apology in a way that there will not be any liability. But back to the point, for me, it's not the fact that we've changed. My point is that even in our best moment, in our openness, we will still do harm because the problem is not the bodies. The problem is how social work has been constructed. And so regardless, that is why we have social workers who are indigenous. We have social workers who are Black. We have social workers who are racialized and still perpetuating some of this harm to communities. Because it is not just the bodies. It is how social work has been constructed. Now, if we understand social work as service to humanity, let us be honest. Between Western society and indigenous community, who are really the best teachers to teach about service to humanity? The history of Western society leave a lot of room to question whether Western society are actually the best teachers to teach us about the sense of humanity. Because some of the historical harm has been perpetuated. I think what we are facing right now in social work is we are still trying to build a plane while we are still flying it. So we acknowledge that we have done harm, but rather than stopping and resetting, we are still piloting while we are removing body parts. But the trajectory of the plane is still towards destruction.
Yeah, that reminds me of our brother from the US. There's this guy, I like watching him. His name is Eddie Cloud. And Eddie Cloud talks about, he usually rolls around this American writer, the one that you talked last time. What was his name? I forgot the name.
Is it James Baldwin?
Baldwin. And Baldwin talks about we are living in a society that changes without changing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? A form of performance, trying to
yeah.
show that we are doing it, but nothing is being transformed. And I think it comes from that fact of never recognizing the role of the third eye in terms of the change you want to make. So that change is so grounded into numerical measures. And
That's
it's
right.
interesting what you say, oh, social work does this because we want to avoid liability. So it becomes all about business because
It has
it
always
becomes
been.
more about liability versus assets and how we're going to balance all that and how we're going to, we're going to grind them because when we say we don't want to accept liability, we are saying they are the liability. So we have to work in such a way that we turn them into assets that now sell them into the marketplace for profit. You see that it's a discourse about the discourse on neoliberal markets infiltrating. And in fact, it's not infiltrating. Right from the beginning, social work was a marketplace.
Yeah.
Right
it has always been. Yes.
It has always been a marketplace.
Yes.
And it's interesting because when you brought that, it reminded me of the conversation we've always had with a couple of my students who really get interested in this conversation, asking the question of how can we go beyond just qualifying and quantifying our reconciliation and how can we revolutionize how we think about teaching, learning, and whatever, when actually the whole, the whole profession has been codified. How can we now decode? But the way we decode is also numerical. Where can
Mm-hmm.
we, how can we now then rethink about decoding from a third eye,
That's
right?
right.
So that we are not just decoding to understand, but we're decoding to imagine,
Yeah,
like the elder said.
that's
It's
right.
about imagination.
That's
How
right.
how do we do that?
That is what I'm saying, in fact, that was where I was going. That
Please.
maybe it is about time that we let the land and the elders be the teacher
Mhm.
who teaches us what to do next. For a long time, it was I've forgotten the name of the elder who said those who contributed to the problem have no right in defining the solution. And so if we have been responsible for the harm that has been done in the past, then maybe it is about time that we listen. And this is where we feel, and that is the focus of my research now. How do we utilize the knowledge and the wisdom of elders to teach us what service to humanity really means, what social work really is supposed to mean? And for me, that is what you talk about, the third eye, the pedagogy of the third eye.
Yeah, but here is the thing. I think the other is also a very complex position to be in. Easy for us to say, let the elders teach us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Easy
I
for us
know.
to say, let Black people be the one to resolve the issue of anti-Black racism.
Mm-hmm.
Like when a case in point, and usually this is mostly used, is when
Need more.
yeah. So when George Floyd dies, we find social work agencies asking for Black people to come and help.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the ending of this conversation is, how can we go into that reconciliation without making those who are marginalized to be the only one who have to change, who have to
Okay.
bring the change? How do we
Yeah.
do that? And
I
I
am
think
I am mindful of time. So is it possible for us to reschedule because my next
I
meeting is
think I
starting?
think we're gonna do that. That
That's
that
right.
will be our next conversation. And
Yes.
I want to thank you, Dr. Paul Benahini, for finding time to engage with me today.
No
And I hope
problem.
viewers, you've been able to learn something out of this. And thank you so much.
Okay.
And I
Thank you
hope you
too.
do take care of yourself. Thank
You
you.
too.
Bye bye, Paul, and
Bye.
take care of yourself.
You too.
Okay.